Hey everyone, it's Mr. Hudspeth here. I am going to do a few of notes with you. We're going to be talking about chemical reactions today. So let's go ahead and get started. One of the best things about this right here, a lot of this is just going to be review from 8th grade. So you know it already right here. We know that a chemical reaction has two parts. The first part, the left side of this equation, that's called the reactants. It's what you start with. On the right side, we have products. It's what you end up with. We already knew that. In a chemical reaction, it's going to look just like this. The reactants are on the left, the products are on the right, and then there's this arrow in the middle. That's what separates the reactants and the products. And that arrow is showing the direction that the reaction happens. So it's what we start with, and then the arrow leading to what we finish with, the products. Another thing that we already know is we know that the law of conservation of mass means mass cannot be created, it cannot be destroyed, it's conserved. So if we start off with a certain amount of things, we're going to finish with that same amount. We're not going to gain or lose atoms. We're not going to gain or lose mass. Okay, that's a pretty good start right there. If I went too fast through any of this, please feel free to stop. You can pause the video and pick it back up when you've finished writing out what I've said. So you do have the controls and have the ability to do that. All right, continuing on. A coefficient and a subscript. We definitely need to know what these two words mean. So coefficient is a number in front of a compound. And you studied what compounds were last semester. You wrote out formulas of different compounds and elements. So the coefficient is it's a full-sized number, and it goes in front of an atom or a compound. A subscript, it's small, it's little bitty, and it's going to be to the right of an element. The subscript describes how many of one specific element there are, where a coefficient tells you how many of an entire compound it is. Okay. We'll do some examples and make sure you know what it is, but that's not something I'm worried about right there. Continuing on, there are some different symbols. That little arrow thing, it separates reactants and products. We already talked about that. Reacts to form. So if I'm naming off a chemical equation, I can say reacts to form when that arrow gets there. Or I can say the word yields. Means the same thing. Next up, we have a plus sign. That means and. So sometimes we're going to have two different reactants. There'll be a plus sign to separate them. An S in parentheses means that whatever it is we're dealing with right there is a solid. An L after a compound means it's a liquid. A G after a compound, in parentheses still, means it's a gas. Mm-hmm. AQ means aqueous. It means it was solid or gas, and then it got dissolved in water. So there are certain things, like if you dissolve some salt in water, it's still salt and it's still water. It's just a mixture. You can separate them out so it hasn't made a chemical reaction. So now it's called an aqueous solution. All right, continuing on. If we ever have a symbol like this shows an arrow going both directions. That just means it's a reversible reaction. We're not too worried about that right now. It just means that it can go one way and it can go another way. And we'll learn more about this at the right time, but I just wanted you to see, if you ever see that symbol, it just means that either side could be reactants, either side could be products. If we ever put a little triangle over the arrow, that means that heat is added to the reaction. It means for the reaction to happen, we have to heat it up. Okay. It's a very common thing to add heat to it because that adds energy to the reaction and it lets it happen. So sometimes there's an actual element symbol written above the arrow, and that means a catalyst is used. And you might remember from previous grades that a catalyst is something that speeds up a reaction, but it's not a part of the reactants. It's not a part of the products. It doesn't actually react, but it speeds up or helps the other elements to react. All right, so there's the definition right there. A substance used to speed up a reaction, but it's not actually used or takes part in the reaction. All right, evidence of a chemical change. So if we have a change in temperature, it gets hotter or it gets colder, that tells us that a chemical reaction has happened. If gas is produced, like bubbles inside a liquid, that's evidence of a chemical change. Changes in color. If we started off with two clear liquids and then all of a sudden the liquid changes to purple, we probably had a chemical change. A change in odor. If we create some amazing smell, then we probably had a chemical change. If a precipitate forms, a precipitate. This is not like in normal speak when we talk about precipitation outside and that means rain. What we're talking about here is we mix two liquids, and when we mix these two liquids, a solid is actually created. And it's something that we're actually going to see in class later this semester. But a precipitate is when a solid forms after mixing two liquids. All right. So types of equations. This is just basic things. We can have a word equation. So it's describing everything as a sentence. Carbon and sulfur combine to form carbon disulfide. So only words. So this and, if we remember back to the previous slide, that means a plus. Combine to form, that means an arrow is drawn. So it'd be C plus S arrow CS2. All right. A skeleton equation uses formulas and symbols. This is typically what you'll see. So our symbols are used. Now, a chemical equation is one that uses this number in front. So this big full-size number that goes in front of an element, if you remember, that's called a coefficient. So a chemical equation is one that uses coefficients. So these coefficients show a balanced equation, and we'll get more into that in a little bit. So right here, we're going to spend a whole lot of time with this. You practiced writing equations last semester, but we're going to take a little bit of time. Iron 3 sulfide reacts with, so reacts with, that's another way of saying plus or and. So reacts with, we're going to definitely put a plus there. Hydrogen chloride to form, that's going to be the arrow, iron 3 chloride, and remember, and is the plus sign, hydrogen sulfide gas. What I want you to do, pause the video right here and try to write out this equation. Try to write out the symbols that are described right here. Go ahead. All right. I hope you gave it a good effort. And here we go. You should have gotten this. So iron 3 sulfide, Fe2S3, and it said solid. So we're just going to put the S in parentheses after the compound. And we've already said reacts with, that means a plus sign. Hydrogen chloride is just HCl. It says gaseous, means it's a gas. So we put that in parentheses right there. The to form, that's going to be our arrow right there. Iron 3 chloride is FeCl3 and means a plus sign. Hydrogen sulfide gas, so that's H2S. And since it's a gas, we're going to put the G in parentheses. The reason we don't have the solid, liquid, gas, or aqueous right here, it doesn't tell us what it is. So we can't put what state of matter it is. All right, continuing on. Here's another one for you to try. Once again, I'm going to pause or ask you to pause the screen, try it out, and once you think you have it written out correctly, continue the recording and check your answer. All right, go ahead and pause. Okay, now that you're back with me, did you get it right? All right, H, NO3, and we're going to say this is aqueous because that means dissolved in water. Reacts with is a plus sign. Sodium carbonate, and that is solid. To form is our arrow. Liquid water, we do know that water is H2O, and we have it as a liquid. And carbon dioxide, gas, right there in parentheses. And sodium nitrate, dissolved in water means aqueous. All right. This is where we're going to end the first video, and we'll pick it up again in a minute. Thank you guys for your attention.